So, hi all. For those that are watching, I'm Dr. Coty Martin and I teach political science here at Wesleyan. With me are the students of Political Science 222, Intro to Comparative Politics. Students in this class have been learning about the different ways countries around the world govern themselves and how their constitutions are similar and different from our own here in the United States. Over the last 2 weeks, students worked in groups to serve as the founding mothers and fathers of a new country. Each group submitted an excellent draft of a new constitution that includes the branches of government, their version of a Bill of Rights for their people, and several other components. Basically, everything you would need to think through to create a new government for a new country. Each group member was required to give their input on everything from having a prime minister or a president, what should and should not be rights, and even on how to tax the people and how the military would be set up in their new country. Not everyone in the group agreed. So just like the founders of this country, the students had to negotiate and compromise on what they thought would be best for their country going forward. So today you will hear presentations from each of the groups on their constitutions. So we will start with the new country of Gryffindor. So give me a second and I'll pull up your PowerPoint. Okay. So whoever wants to start, just keep yourself muted if you're not the one chatting, please.
All right. Hello. Welcome to the land of Gryffindor. It is a great land of doors. Oh, next slide, please. So our flag is on the, what we'll be covering is the flag, motto, and our government structure, our Bill of Rights, amendment process, and all of our signatures. Next slide. This is our flag. It is a griffin encased in a shield with a white stripe right behind it. Next slide. Our motto is open doors and open opportunities for all, really pushing on the fact that we are equal within the state of Gryffindor. Next slide.
So we're going to start out here with the executive branch. We chose to do a federal representative government. And we had some debate on this one, but we ended up picking prime minister when it was all said and done. Some of the powers of our executive branch include calling Congress into special sessions, controlling the Gryffindor ambassadors, granting pardons for offenses, and then each power not listed in the Constitution shall be granted to the executive authority. And this is one of the big ones. It's a vote of no confidence may be held in the case of inappropriate execution of the power by the prime minister. You can go to the next slide.
All right, for our legislative branch, we chose a bicameral legislature, which is called the Gryffindor National Assembly. It's broken up into two houses. The House of the People, which is represented by one representative per every 1,000 citizens, which also may approve the prime minister and provide a budget. And all of the representatives have 4 terms of 5 years each. There's also the House of the Province, which is 3 representatives from each of the 12 provinces in Gryffindor. They may nominate the prime minister, and they have to approve all treaties, and they have 7 terms of 5 years each. Their general powers include setting standard metric units, taxing governments of provinces, and votes of no confidence, which must pass through both of the houses. Next slide. And within the legislative branch, we had to come to a few clauses that would they would just oversee the rest of the Constitution. So we've got the limited clause, which says that the National Assembly can't create any law or act that doesn't relate to the powers in the section, especially Section 3, which is the general powers of the legislative branch. We also have the Human Rights Clause, which is our anti-discrimination clause, the Federal Tax Clause, which means they can only tax the province's governments, and the Position Pension Clause, which says that they must provide a reasonable pension for services rendered to all members of the government. Next slide.
Okay, for our judicial branch, we have 9 judges and they serve for life, and they must renounce party affiliation and must elect a high judge. They are appointed by PM and approved by House of the People. And in the High Court, the supreme power over the state, they cannot handle province issues and may deem any act of government unconstitutional. They also can indicate a boundary redraw. Okay, next slide.
The bureaucratic branch, unlike most governments that only have 3 branches, ours have 4. The bureaucratic is its own branch. The bureaucracy is built around the High Minister, which is elected by electors from the provinces. The High Minister will then appoint ministers of all of our ministries. We have the Ministry of State Security, War, Environmental Development, Human Development, Commerce, Diplomacy, and Technological Advancement. All of these ministers make up the High Council, and they all serve 3 terms of 5 years. Within this, any law or action of the legislative branch is sent to the bureaucracy to be executed. They can send it to any department they wish to, and they will execute it to the fullest of their extent of power.
So for our local government, we decided that the citizens would elect a mayor, and the mayor just has to be of voting age and own property, and they're allowed to serve 4 terms up to 5 years. Along with the mayor, it's actually kind of laid out by sort of like the canon. So they will also have a council, but the council will be made up of 10 citizens, and they will also do things such as create taxes and laws. And they also have the right to establish criminal courts and civil courts within the community. That way they can establish more districts and allow for further separation. Next slide, please.
All right, so any constitution necessarily needs to have a Bill of Rights, and this just kind of outlines the rights of all of our citizens. We went back and forth on a lot of ideas, but we narrowed it down to 15. These include things like all humans being born equal in rights, equal marriage rights, foreign trade with no restrictions for our citizens, the right to freedom of movement and residence in the provinces, equal access and opportunity to government resources, voting rights, and the right to a peaceful assembly. Next slide.
So this was a challenging project. We all had some very different opinions, but overall, we believe that Gryffindor came out to be a very successful state we'd like to imagine. We left a lot of rights and decisions up to the people who would be coming later generations after us, so that whatever the future may hold, technological advancements, new societies, new people could have the opportunity to change it and make it flexible for them. But the state still had enough strength to make sure no one would be abused by different powers. So there's our signatures marking what Gryffindor is, and that's the state.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So good work. That was impressive. A couple questions, or I'm going to ask one question to each group. So my question for your group is kind of give us some insight into why you decided to have 4 branches of government. Why make the bureaucracy its own thing?
This was kind of my thing that I put forward. I thought it would be really cool to have 4 branches of government, and one of the ideas that popped in my head was the bureaucracy. And something that I don't really like about our current government is the fact that the bureaucracy is run by the executive authority, and it becomes very politicized. So many things aren't actually getting done what should be done. And so making this its 4th branch government gives it its own checks and balances within the other systems so that it can all run smoother.
All right, interesting. So next up we have Panem. So give me a second to get that one up on the screen. Okay, so whoever wants to start with Panem, take it away.
Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin Cottrell, and my group members were Delaney Gump, Devin Coutan, Emily Grogg, and Elena Alana Claypool, and we modeled our Constitution off of the Hunger Games and the country of Panem. And this would be what the Constitution would look like post rebellion Hunger Games series. Next slide.
So Panem has 12 provinces or districts, as they're called here. We have 2 identity groups and 6 religious identities. We have 3 political parties. Our motto is, "May the odds ever be in your favor." You can see we've got pictures here, a map of Panem, our flag, our state symbol, and our national animal, the mockingjay. Next slide, please.
So our preamble: to fix the wrongs of the past, to establish a more equal institution, to prevent corruption and tyranny, to empower the people's voices, to uphold the purest form of democracy, the confederation of the revived states of Panem, and the people of it practice civil liberties free from overreach and corruption through the fair democratic process. The citizens of Panem are crucial to the operations of the state, therefore all sovereignty lies with them. Through a cooperative and productive alliance of districts and their citizens, Panem will better serve and protect the rights of its people. Next slide, please.
As I mentioned before, Panem consists of 12 districts, and each district has its own industry, for example, agriculture, or textiles, or technology. With the exception of the capital district that focuses specifically on government. This structure was instituted during the Hunger Games under the rule of President Snow. And the system still remains in place, but it's a lot more involved. It works a lot more harmoniously now than it did then. The districts are all sovereign and responsible for governing within their own borders. The federal government serves primarily just to manage interstate and foreign affairs. Next slide, please.
So our federal legislative authority consists of a House of Commons, and the House of Commons has certain powers. They make laws of all areas, which must be passed by a majority vote. And they have the power to declare war if the majority vote passes. And they also have an impeachment process for the executive branch. The federal executive authority has several powers, including the ability to declare a state of emergency, executive orders, and the executive branch does have veto power, but our executive branch has a president and a federal council. And the way that works, which Delaney will explain here in a second, depends on the situation. And they can declare war with approval from the legislative branch. And the federal council can impeach the president if there's evidence that they can do so. And then the federal judicial authority, they have the power of judicial review and impeachment as well, which makes it a very powerful branch of government, even though it doesn't do quite as much as the others. And district authority is set up the same exact way with the House of Less Commons and the governor and his cabinet and the judicial courts, which we have a religious tribunal, and then we have like regular civil and criminal courts. And then the districts decide what kind of authority they want the local governments to have, or if they want local governments at all. And then we do have a couple of places in our Constitution that allow for a citizen vote to recall possibly a government official or to vote on a policy. And this vote basically initiates a process in the government to either start impeachment trials or get a policy moving. Next slide, please.
Like Caitlin said, for our Panem has 2 set systems of government, a federal and district, and by set, I mean listed in the Constitution. For our federal executive branch, we have a federal council of 12 citizen-elected district leaders from each district. The council makes policy and executes the laws to better the whole Confederation. They can motion to declare war and they deal with foreign affairs. A president is appointed from the members. They serve a 1-year term. They have veto power and In case of conflict between the members of the Federal Council, their voice remains supreme over others. For the legislative branch, a House of Commons is made up of 60 elected delegates, 5 from each district. Delegates serve 4-year terms limited to 3. The House of Commons makes laws to better the Confederation. They construct the federal budget, and they cannot show bias or preference towards a single district. The House of Commons heads the military and has to approve all acts of war. War between districts is not allowed. The head of the House is selected from the delegates and heads the sessions. For our judicial branch, a Supreme Court is made up of 13 appointed justices. District courts or district governors nominate and approve, and they are approved by District Congress. The 13th member is appointed by the House of Commons by a 2/3 vote. They serve 6-year terms and are limited to 2. The Supreme Court interprets and upholds the law. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction on issues between the districts, but mainly serves as an appeal court on constitutional issues. They have, like Caitlin said, they had judicial review. The Chief Justice is the most superior member, but if one is not to be determined, it is the member selected by the House of Commons. Next slide, please. For our executive district branch, the district governor is citizen elected. They serve 4 years with a 2-term limit. They create a cabinet. How many members and what positions are created are up to the discretion of the governor. The governor maintains the order of the district and they implement policy to better it. The Minister of Industry is a mandatory position on the governor's cabinet. They serve the duration of the governor's term. The Minister of Industry is elected by the citizens, and they are basically a running mate for the district governor. The job of the minister is to oversee and operate the industry in that district. For example, in District 4, the Minister of Industry is in charge of the fishing operations. For our legislative branch, we have a House of Less Commons, and they are based off of the population of each district. A head of the less is selected from the delegates, and they head the sessions. A House of Less Commons can only pass legislation that affects their district, and they create the lower courts and create the district budget, and they head the military and police of that district. For our district Supreme Court, they are made up of 9 elected justices. They have original jurisdiction unless a lower court is created by the House of Less Commons, and they deal with matters inside the district. Due to our rich religious identity, a religious tribunal is created to deal with religious conflicts. They are made up of 7 members, 6 representatives from each of our 6 religions, and a 7th unbiased member appointed by the House of Less Commons. They always have original jurisdiction on religious issues unless a case presents itself to be religious. Next slide, please.
Okay, so Article 4, our Bill of Rights. This was one of the things we spent probably the most time discussing because it was super important to us to really right the wrongs of the past of Panem. So number 1, freedom of religion. As I think Alana said earlier, our state has 6 different religions. So it was super important to make sure that they had the freedom to practice those religions. Equal protection under the law, freedom of speech. That was super important because in the old Panem, they weren't allowed to speak up against the government. So we wanted to give that to them. The right to vote is 19 and up. The reason we picked 19 was because for the Hunger Games ages, that was 12 to 18, and we didn't want to burden that age group even more than they had already been. Slavery is illegal. Right to human rights, right to due process, the right to privacy. We chose that because in the Hunger Games, like they had surveillance over a lot of the people without their permission. Right to bear arms, again, to protect the citizens. The Hunger Games is illegal for the citizens, thank God. And then freedom from the military, because in Panem, the old Panem, the capital used military force for anyone who spoke up about the government if it didn't line up with their agenda. Next slide, please.
So we felt the best defense of rights would be the judicial branch in the Supreme Court. And this is because of the power of judicial review to review all of the laws that the House of Commons makes, as well as the religious tribunals, which really is personal to our multiple religious groups. And we want to make sure we take care of them and care for their issues. And then also this is for protection against police violence, which Alana will talk about a little bit, where we have a review of cases in our policing system. For taxation, we decided to have income and property taxes with a progressive tax system. And then we will have a sales tax, but it won't exceed 6% unless there's inflation. And we just kept it really basic with that.
Across all of Panem, there will be one currency. Our bills will be named tesserae and our coins will be named prims. They come in different monetary forms, but they are in the same material form, such as bills and coins. The Minister of Industry is in charge of the flow of currency and is regulated by the House of Commons due to the fact that they have to create budgets. Any other material form of currency, such as credit cards, debit cards, are up to the discretion of the districts. Next slide, please.
Panem will have a standing professional military. The militaries are formed at the district level, but they're also considered a part of the national military as well. Military service is voluntary unless the Confederation is in crisis. The minimum age to sign up is 19. We made the minimum age to sign up 19 because of the trauma to 12 to 18-year-olds during the Hunger Games. In case of statewide emergency, a draft for all citizens 19 and older. The draft is for emergencies only. The House of Less Commons and House of Commons have overall command over the military.
Panem's police force consists of local police force and district departments. They work together to investigate and bring people to due process of law. Both are responsible to uphold both the federal and district constitutions, and they are responsible to protect the lives and property of the citizens of Panem. The district police force has a little bit more responsibility than the local in that they are also in charge of investigating interstate crimes. Next slide, please.
Okay, so Article 8, amending the Constitution and conclusion. In order for the Constitution to be changed, a Hunger Games must be held for the politicians of different parties. The winner can reform the government as they see fit. Our goal is to have a confederation with equal institutions representing and empowering people's voices while preventing corruption and tyranny to uphold the purest form of democracy.
All right, good work. I thought it was really interesting that you guys kind of ran with the idea of something that existed a little bit, and you really added a lot of the detail of the history after the Hunger Games movement, you know, what came next. My question for your group is about the rights, or the human rights clause that you had in your Bill of Rights. As I was reading through, you say you tie it to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. I wondered, why did you decide to do it that way instead of giving specificity to the rights in your particular country?
So this clause was my idea, and I'd used it previously in another project, but we thought it would hold, it would mark a sense of accountability to a higher authority. And international organizations, while they do not have a ton of legitimacy, if more states were maybe to do this, then it would provide to the legitimacy of these organizations. And with the country of Panem having issues with human rights before this constitution, we wanted to make sure the government was being held accountable. And it kind of blurs the lines of sovereignty a little bit, but we thought this was necessary in order to keep checks and balances on the government and the federal government, especially from getting too powerful.
All right, excellent, excellent work. Okay, and then now we will switch to our last group, Virago.
Right. So we wanted to have a little bit of fun with this. So we decided to create a feminist utopia. So our country is named Virago, which is Latin for female warrior. So it was founded by myself, Hannah Benson, Jessica Gardner, Julia O'Neill, Lane Stover, and Angel Dorsey. Next slide, please. So we'll start with the introductions, just the basics, symbols, geography, and demographics. Next slide, please. So as you can see, our flag does clearly display a uterus, but we do not want this to be misinterpreted. So you do not have to have a uterus to enter or participate in our country. That said, men are not permitted to fully participate in our country through voting or running for or holding public office. We did mention in our Constitution that we reserved the right to create a sort of blacklist, as it were, of men who are not permitted to enter our country. We also decided that men, despite only being allowed entry with a visa, do have to pay a tax to reside in Virago. This tax is put in place to replace the tax that is placed on feminine hygiene products, frequently called the tampon tax, that's present in many countries. Next slide, please. So our animal is a giraffe. Our motto, we chose a quote from the notorious RBG. I said on the equality side of it that it is essential to a woman's equality with man that she be the decision maker, that her choice be controlling. And our song is God is a Woman by Ariana Grande. Next slide, please. So as the dice chose, we have 7 provinces, which are all named after very prominent feminists or very famous women throughout history. So we have Curie, as in Marie Curie, Parks, as in Rosa Parks, Angelo, as in Maya Angelou, Laverne, as in Laverne Cox, Sirleaf, as in Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who is a little more unknown compared to the other ones listed. She was the former president of Liberia, and she was the first elected female head of state on the African continent. We have Steinem, as in Gloria Steinem, and RBG. So we have 3 identity groups, 1 religious identity, which is, I might pronounce this wrong, Igualdade, I believe, which is Brazilian Portuguese for equality. We have 4 political parties, and we chose Virago to make this female utopia, as I said earlier, which means female warrior in Latin, with only having 3 identity groups and 1 religious identity. We knew it was probably going to have to be a relatively small country for this to function fully. So we have roughly 250,000 people. We have a mountain range, coastlines, the river of Igualdade, which runs through the mountains and across the country. We have a relatively temperate climate with the river and mild summers and cool winters. We have a fairly adequate, sustainable farming and food production system. This is a country founded by and for women. We strive for peace, equality, acceptance, and understanding among all of our citizens. Next slide, please.
All right, so next we're going into the actual Constitution, and you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the basis of our preamble is that we not only expect equality through the law, but also we uphold the people of Virago are also responsible with promoting it in general society. So the preamble is, with the ultimate purpose to strengthen the nation and all citizens within, to guarantee freedom and equal representation for all humans fighting to promote and maintain social justice and general welfare under the protection of one goddess, we the people decree this the political constitution of Virago. Next slide. Hi. So a general overview of our government and how it's organized. We have a unitary government system, which means all of our power is centralized within the state, which consists of 3 branches: the executive, legislative, and judicial. The executive branch includes the Queen, the Chancellor, and the Cabinet. The first Queen will be elected from the Parliament. Following that, they serve life terms or they can choose to retire, and they select the next Queen from the Parliament, meaning this isn't a typical monarchy that follows bloodline. The Queen is more just a title that gives them the head of state powers. The Chancellor must be at least 25 years of age. If they're over the age of 60, they require a cognitive test to ensure that they are fit to run. No men can run because it wouldn't be representative of our female utopia. You have to either be a natural born citizen or have lived in Virago for at least 15 years as a citizen. The Cabinet is appointed from the Parliament by the President as well. The legislative branch includes the Parliament. Requirements for that are the same as the Chancellor, and that also has 1 house. The judicial branch consists of the Supreme Court, which has ultimate authority over all constitutional cases, and also is the head of all the lower case courts. The requirements for that follow the other ones, but also the judge must have served in one of the lower courts, so one of the district courts or the state court of appeals, and they serve 20-year terms with no more than 2. None of our branches have the power to completely dissolve the other. However, a vote of no confidence can be used if a member of the executive branch needs to be removed, and an emergency referendum can be called to remove someone from the legislative branch or the Parliament. Next slide.
So yeah, since we're a centralized state, the executive branch holds all authority over the provinces and is also responsible for appointing the municipal leaders for those specific provinces. So basically, and we'll go into more detail on this later, but we have local administrations rather than local governments. Every few weeks, the municipal council will meet with the chancellor to discuss issues and needs related to these local communities. And the executive branch has exclusive control over matters such as universal health care, civil rights laws, immigration, universal income, and federal criminal laws. And also, like Julia stated in the last slide, the Queen serves as head of state. She is to act as a representative of Virago's unity and integrity. The Chancellor, chosen by Parliament from its ranks, is to serve as the head of government, with her primary role being to finalize or veto laws passed by Parliament. She also acts as Virago's representative in international arenas such as the United Nations. And the role of her cabinet is to simply advise her. So next slide.
The legislative branch is just the whole House of Parliament. The responsibilities is that all legislative power rests within the Parliament. All members are elected by the people, but they do have minimum requirements regarding age and education. They propose legislation and they follow the constitutional process for legislative approval. And they just have to make sure that all laws passed are in the best interest of Virago's people, and they have to promote the well-being and equality of everyone living in Virago, whether citizen or non-citizen. The legislative process begins with either a member of Parliament, a member of the executive branch, or a citizen proposing that a law needs to be made. And then a bill is drafted and presented before the Parliament by a committee. There is a majority vote taken to either send the bill to a grand committee for amendments or to approve it for a second reading, where it will either be approved or rejected for passage into law by a majority vote. If it's approved by the majority vote, it is sent to the chancellor to either become the law or to be vetoed. If it's vetoed, it will be sent back to the Parliament for a second vote, and the veto can be overrode by a 2/3 majority vote, or it'll be killed at that point. Next slide.
So we decided that the most fair and equal strategy for law would be to create the judicial branch as a separate form of our government. And we have the Supreme Court, which is going to be the highest form of law throughout our land. And they have the power to set national precedent, and they also can overrule any lower courts. And then our lower courts consist of the 7 district courts within our 7 provinces. And then if there are further disputes, you can appeal your lower district courts to our circuit court system. And from there, if there's even further dispute, you can take it back to the Supreme Court, where they can adjudicate the final decision. Next slide, please.
Okay, so we created a Bill of Rights that include 10 rights that we thought were important for the citizens of Virago. So next slide. These are the first 5. The first one is not to be subjected to medical or scientific experimentation without consent. Julia was very excited for this one and pushed very hard for this to be the first right in our Bill of Rights. We also include some that are familiar to others, like freedom of speech, religion, and press, and then the petition of government and to peacefully assemble. We also include a fair trial or fair punishment for crimes. And then one we also included we thought was important was to live in an environment which promotes health of both humans and the earth. So including climate change in our Bill of Rights. Next slide, please. We also thought that the basic necessities of life, like food, water, and shelter, universal health care, and universal income were important. A quality education at both the primary and secondary level. And we also thought that experience and exposure was important to education, so we wanted to include that as a right. Voting without discrimination, fair compensation for work, and then freedom from discrimination. As Rachel said in the beginning, that we note that all women may not have a uterus, but that does not mean that they cannot call Virago their home. So we note that we live in a state that is free from discrimination. Next slide, please. Okay. And that is all, so thanks for visiting Virago.
All right, that was fascinating. You guys really ran with the fact that when I randomly generated the groups, your group was all female. It was really cool to see you connect everything to your main theme there. My question for your group is, as I was reading through your constitution, you mentioned that more or less for any office, you had to have a particular level of education in terms of college degree or something like that. So what was the thinking behind that? I thought that was really interesting.
We really felt it was important that not just anybody can hold office, because if you don't really know how a country is supposed to be run and how decisions are supposed to be made and how you're supposed to consider the best thing for the people, and you're just really unprepared for the office that you get into, that it wouldn't be the best for the people that you would be serving.
Okay. Like I said, it was really interesting. And each group had something that was just very unique that, to my knowledge, I haven't come across in other countries. So in terms of the way the branches were set up in one, or, you know, the Minister of Industry in Panem, or this thing with education in Virago, I thought it was really interesting, some of the unique things that you guys came up with. So to kind of wrap up with this, what was the most fun part of this project? And anybody can chime in here. What did you enjoy the most about the project?
I like the debates and just, trying to figure out, what everyone else prefers and thinks creates like a stable and functional government. Like, I thought that was really interesting.
So having to negotiate some of these points, right? And I feel like that's something that a lot of Americans don't realize was, part of the drafting process of the American Constitution, right? They had to sit down and have those same debates and arguments, to, put a blunt point on it, over some of the different things. And I loved going into the different breakout rooms and hearing Tara and James arguing about prime ministers versus presidents, or going into other groups and hearing about the Bill of Rights and what should and shouldn't be in there. What was the most challenging part of this? Anybody want to chime in there? What was something that you found challenging?
The debating. The most fun part was the most difficult.
Good. Yeah, and you know, that's probably true of anyone that's ever had to sit down and do this process, right? It's not easy. Did anybody think it was easy to try and come up with all this stuff? No. And you were inspired by other things. I'm sure you looked up other constitutions, and that's how other countries have done it as well. So, last question here. Which of these countries would you want to live in? I say all of them. I mean, it sounds like I'd have to get a visa to live in Virago, but
You're not on the blacklist.
I'm not on the blacklist. All right.
Yeah, we gave you a visa. We've agreed.
So I hope you guys had fun with this project. And for those listening, I hope you had fun hearing about how these students created their own countries and kind of went through all the steps that any particular group of people have to do to try and establish their own nation state. So thanks for listening.